Yes.
Now, I had finished with the 65 war, but before I continue with my career in the 66 Armored Regiment to which I was posted, I just want I just wanted to pick out uh, a few points about the war. You see, as I said last time, when somebody starts a war, you must be able to see the end of it.
Mm.
It's easy to start and escalate.
Mm.
It's not easy to wind it down. Now, whatever the conflict that you do, eventually you have to sit on a table and diplomatically decide the issue. So it is said that when diplomacy fails,
Mm.
the military, the political arm of the government, for further action against those with whom diplomacy has failed.
Mm.
Having said that, the point is that the political leadership and the military leadership, for that must matter, must have an idea as to how long this war must continue and what it must involve. You can't carry on and on like you see the Ukraine war, for instance. It has to come to an end.
Right.
We had World War One and World War Two when where this principle was not
Yeah.
appreciated.
Yeah.
It carried on for 4 years, 5 years, 5.5 years. Massive human destruction, massive destruction of property and cities. That's not really the answer. So those who are in the military art must remember, I called it the military art, not the science,
Mm.
right? It is an art. It is like painting a picture. You got to know when to put the brushes down and call it out.
Mm.
And how, what is the result that you wish to achieve when you call it out?
Mm.
All right, that's one point. The second point is that when a war starts off, the first few generals or high commanders are always sacked.
Oh.
Now, why is that? You found in World War One, World War Two, even during the days when India was a subservient country as a colony of the British, a large number of generals and brigadiers were sacked in the first few weeks
Mm.
because they failed.
Mm.
The question is, why did they fail? Again, it's a question of intelligence, which we'll be bringing up again and again.
Yeah.
You've decided to go to conflict
Mm.
because you know what the enemy is doing as far as you're concerned, according to your intelligence input by your intelligence services, by your diplomatic services,
Mm.
by even the military facing each other on the ground. You get information and you decide what the enemy is going to do and accordingly make your plans. But the experience that we have is that this never works. Once the battle starts, all these intelligence inputs seem to fail because they were wrong in the first instance. Therefore, the superior commanders must have faith in the junior most forward troops, the men who face the enemy and the young officers who face the enemy, who telling them what they see and listen to them rather than think that whatever came from the government or from the intelligence services is the gospel truth.
Mm.
Lot of failures take place because of this, right? So the first few generals do get sacked. It happened in 65, both on our side as well as on Pakistan side.
Right.
The next question is the, after the war is over, the generals who have succeeded, they want the accolades.
Mm.
I give an example of Lieutenant General Harbakh Singh. Now, there's no doubt that he was a top military commander because, as I said, he had a huge command right from Ladakh to northern Rajasthan, which is under 4 army commanders today, but he's a single army commander doing this. In those days, there were no helicopters available to move fast, very few available. So you have to move by fixed wing aircraft or by jeep or something like that. It took hours and hours for a vast sector
Mm.
for him to visit those areas where he felt his presence was necessary. But nevertheless, he did that, and we did succeed in destroying the Pakistan First Armored Division. And also, though we didn't penetrate very far south of Samba when we did the counterattack, we did take Pakistan territory. And the ego of the general develops when he succeeds like that. So Harbaksh made a statement supported by all the Sikh governments and Punjabi government to say that he's the top experienced army commander of India, and therefore after General Chaudhary retires, he should be the next chief.
Okay.
This is ambition. So I wanted to say a few words about ambition.
Yeah.
Now you are also a teacher and teach girls and boys. How do you read ambition? Any mother or any father will say, my child, what are you going to be? And the child doesn't give a very reasonable answer. They say, this guy's got no ambition. I mean, if you join the military as a second lieutenant, what do you want to be? My mother used to ask me the same thing. She said, I don't know what I want to be. I just want to be a good second lieutenant. No, but you should have some ambition. You should work very hard so you become a general or something. How do you do that? Now, I'll quote, in World War II, the Germans got defeated, as you know. The Kaiser was the king of Germany. And World War I, rather. And in 1918, Germany accepted defeat because Kaiser didn't want foreign troops to come into Germany. So he accepted unconditional surrender. That means that whatever the Allies order, that is the Western powers, he will obey. But he didn't want foreign troops to come into his land. So in 1919, there was the Treaty of Versailles in Paris, famous Paris, of Louis XIV.
Yes.
The Palace of Versailles. And the French commander-in-chief, Marshal Foch, he asked the German commander-in-chief, what is it that makes the German general staff so efficient and effective? What are the qualities that you look for in officers who have already reached a stage of reasonable eminence, shall I call it, at younger law, that you induct them from the units into the German general staff? Now, why did he ask this question? Because we know both in World War I and World War II that there is no staff in any army of the world can compare with the German general staff. The general staff are people who, whatever their rank, they're from generals down to majors, are the ones who are working out how to move armies, corps, units, battalions from one end to the other, etc. For instance, in Germany in World War II, World War I also, you had huge movements of troops. In World War II, for instance, Hitler attacked Russia as well as after the West. He had troops moving from left to east, from west to east and east to west. This requires careful planning, how to move a whole division from point A to point B. Division comprising some 15 to 18,000 men, right? With guns and tanks and ammunition and trains of supplies and so on. This business of staff working is every army has it, so do we. And so you select officers for staff, every country has its method. So Marshal Foch of France asked the German chief, how do you select officers? What are the qualities you're looking for? Because you agree that an officer whom you select must have reached a certain level of competence. He should have done a staff college, done well in his courses, done well in his command of companies and battalions. And you want to bring him to the general staff. So the German general replied, I'm sorry, we don't look for qualities, we look for the absence of a quality. So he was asked, what is that quality that you want absent? And this German chief said, the quality of ambition. So now what is the definition of ambition? You see, there may be an ambition to help your country, maybe, but generally ambition is looked at as your personal view of yourself, where you want to go. Many books on development of human beings said that you must have an aim, you must have an ambition, and achieve that aim and then go forward in life to rise higher and higher wherever you go. So what did the German chief mean? And he said that we look for the quality of lack of ambition. So when he was asked to explain this, he said, we want very efficient officers in the German staff who have no personal ambition. They want to serve the nation or serve the staff to the best of their ability wherever they are. Nothing for themselves. Now, this dedicated officer does all his work for the sake of an efficient staff duties and also for the support of his country. He wants nothing out of it for himself. So he's a dedicated worker. Now, if you have a quality of ambition and he's wanting a good annual confidential report and he wants to suck around his boss and things like that, then he's not accepted in the German general staff. In other words, as you call it in Urdu, kushamat. You want to confuse kushamat your superiors, you're not fit. Now just think about it. Whether you're a minister of this country in politics or whether you're a military commander, think about this quality of ambition because you want something for yourself rather than for your duty or for your country. So you have to be selfless, in other words. If you look at Vedanta and your Gita, etc., saying the same thing. So these officers of the German general staff are selfless and they are selected because they don't have any ambition. And by the way, between you and me, they reach the highest of ranks. They become the commanders-in-chief. They become the corps commanders. They become the bosses, and they're absolutely staunch for their country and for their duty. See? So in the case of General Harbaks and the words that went around at that time after 65 war, was General Chaudhary is a Bengali, he got fearful and he thought that the Pakistanis would break through at Khem with the armored division. And therefore, he brought in the reserves to further protect Punjab by bringing there was the 23 division, which he moved from the east to the Sutlej line, ready to move forward to the Bias line in case we had failed in our defense of Khem and the Pakistani armored division was able to move towards Bias. He had this troop. But what we must realize is that in any level of command in the army, whether you're a lieutenant colonel commanding a unit of infantry, of armor, or whether you're a brigade commander commanding 3 units, or a divisional commander commanding so many arms and services, or a chief, or a corps commander, you must have what are known as reserves. Reserves as units and troops kept up your sleeve to move into that area of battle where things may go wrong or where things may be successful and you want to punch through the enemy. These are called the application of reserves. That's the job of a senior commander. And therefore, one doesn't know how the war will go. We all expected our defense to function, but as I said, it's a touch and go as far as the Pakistani 1st Armored Division attack was concerned. We managed to hold it for various reasons. I also told you earlier, maybe God was on our side and not on their side. So they made large number of mistakes. We made slightly less. That's the only difference. But we held our ground, despite a number of battalions running away. And the Pakistani attack failed. And then our thrust from Samba succeeded to some extent. So the war finished off with reasonable advantage to India, despite having been taken by surprise. Now, when the army chief moved 23 division to Sutlej, it was not because of fear, it was because of movement of reserves in case something went wrong. Had it gone wrong, he would have occupied the Bias defenses and prevented the Pakistanis from capturing that area of Punjab. Right. Now, nonetheless, Captain Amarendra Singh, who was till recently the Chief Minister of Punjab, he wrote a book, a nice thick book, because he was the ADC to General Harbaks. And he was supported in writing this book by a very fine officer who served under me also, and for whom I have great regard, is Lieutenant General Mon Shergill. He's the son of Major General Rajinder Singh Sparrow, NBC, who commanded the Armored Division during the 65 war. And that whole family is very high class as military officers. So Mon was helping him. He wrote this book. They had a release in Delhi. And I also bought one of these copies and went through it. But what was being conveyed there is that had it not been for General Harbaksh, India would have been in a disaster situation. And therefore, since he was the most highly trained and experienced field commander, he should be made the next chief rather than General Manekshaw, who was in Eastern Army and who was senior to him, right? Now, Indira Gandhi, of course, is the prime minister, and her cabinet decides who's going to be the next chief. So, despite this, what they did was that they made Lieutenant General Kamara Mangla, who's also King's Commissioned Officer, from the gunners, they made him the chief for 2 years. And meanwhile, Harbaksh retired from Punjab. And after Kamara Manglam had done his 2 years of tenure or 2.5 years of tenure, Manekshaw became the next chief, much to the advantage of India for 1971 war. Right. So I wanted to talk about the quality of ambition. Since you're a teacher, maybe that might help you in training your young girls and boys as to when you do seva, when you serve, it's not for self. I told you earlier about ancient times when the Prince of Wales of England got Prince of Wales's feathers, which also belongs to my school. Ich dien in German, written by the Bolshevik king, which means I serve the king. This is seva. Seva is not for self. Seva is for others. See? All right. Now, there are a few points here. We have to respect the concentrated artillery fire. You remember, in history, we have Napoleon Bonaparte, who became the Emperor of France. He was a gunner officer, artillery officer. And he saved the Bastille by use of guns when it was attacked by the public of France. That made him eventually commander-in-chief of the French armies and then later Emperor of France. He always said that the guns are the ones that control the battle. That's why the artillery calls itself the king of the battle. So, one has to respect heavy artillery fire concentrated on our positions. I explained to you once how a complete battalion ran from the Chigil Canal when it had concentrated artillery fire coming. They did not have the trenches. Similarly, 2 of our battalions ran away from the Khemkaran battle when Pakistan Armored Division and Infantry Division brought down artillery fire because they had not dug trenches and deep trenches and overhead protection. Can't survive. So you have to respect. Now that means that when you train a military, you have to in peacetime train them with artillery fire and bullets firing at them. Now, unfortunately, here we are not permitted to have any casualties in peacetime due to our own fire. So we have to fire over people's heads or with machine guns and things, and also to give artillery fire from a distance. So you get the crump, crump, crump of the artillery and the whistling sound of the guns, but it's not landing on you. It's landing maybe 800 yards away, so you're quite safe. Anyway, that's called battle inoculation. When you get inoculated for a disease, you've got to get a battle inoculation that inoculates you this type of noises and sounds and destruction that is going to take place in the field of battle for green troops to be trained to go to battle. So it's a lot of training required. I explained to you earlier about the failure of 4 Division in 1962 war when they ran away, and that PM Kaur became a major general who's the friend of Jawaharlal Nehru, and he built accommodation and all that. He said, I'll build accommodation, free troop labor and all that, and save the government some money. It's not a question of saving money. You've got to train those troops every day of the peacetime so that they act well in war. If you don't do that, they will run. Now, another point arises here is the question of officer leadership. In India, after the 65 war, we realized, and of course, we had an experience of the 47-49 war in Kashmir, but then there was just after World War II, we had just become an independent country. We really were not thinking for ourselves. Once we became independent, the first war we faced was 62, Then we came to grief. The next was 65. And one thing we learned is that when you've got green troops, they get shaken very fast. Therefore, officer leadership has to be top class. Your second lieutenants, and captains, and even CEOs sometimes have to get out in front in the firing of the enemy to encourage the men to get up and attack or whatever they have to do. The sight of your commander in front of you is what encourages men to fight. He's the leader, so he's in front. In Pakistan, we found this deficiency amongst their officers because young officers are very good. But by the time they become lieutenant colonel, brigadier, they are looking at other lobes of office. Somebody wants to be president of Pakistan, somebody wants to be a diplomat, somebody wants to be a foreign service officer or something.
Right.
Because they're ruling the country, they've got these vacancies for themselves, so they don't want to die in the battle.
Right.
The result is that the senior officers are not good quality because they have a personal, ambitious agenda, right? Which Indian officers don't have. In India, whether you're a general or whether you are a lieutenant colonel, you're ready to sleep in the front line in the trenches with your men. At the same time, you can dine with the President of India on his table with all the aplomb that is expected of you in high society. You have to be able to do both. That's what the Indian Army officers trained at. I want to give you a few of these points to the training of the officer corps of the Indian Army, right from the Indian Military Academy or the officers training schools, and when they join the unit, they're given this training. You have to lead from the front, whether you're in a tank, or whether you're in the infantry. And number two is that you expose yourself when the men are getting shaky, so that you lead them. This happened in Kargil War, where our captains, second lieutenants, and up to lieutenant colonels were fantastic at officers' play. That's why maximum number of officers were killed. In Indian Army, we lose a large number of officers in battle. The proportion roughly is 1 officer for 100 men in our organization. But we're losing something like 8 or 9 officers out of 100 men in all our battles, which means the lead from the front. So therefore, young men who want to join the Indian military normally come as the last choice because they want cushy jobs in the civil street before they join the military.
Right.
Not only the pays are not that much that you might get in civil work, but then you've got a danger to your life. And yet you'll find that by the time they've done a few years training in the Indian military, they become far superior human beings. Whether they are Jawans or officers, because they're trained in this discipline. That firstly, you have to serve. Secondly, you have to have no ambition. And thirdly, you have to lead from the front. Not only as an officer, but as a sergeant or 3-striper, 2-striper, you have to lead your section from the front, not from the back. And this aspect of service is what makes the difference between a well-trained military man and the civil society. See? So, all right. And that's a good example to our youth, because after all, what is the example that you have to your children for reaching a high standard of personal conduct? It's not the politicians, surely. Many of the civil leaders in schools and colleges may not be all that good. Or in the business world, it's all a cut and thrust sort of organization. You have to make more profit than the next guy. That's why you get moved out. It's a military, because they are the ones who do service. What leads from this is that, in my view, unless the people of your country love their army, why? Because of these reasons. The army is not very successful. Example here, the armies of Brazil and Argentina, where I happen to visit, where they hate the military. Why? Because the military is after the civil society all the time to get whatever the dictator wants. You see? So you have to function with civil society with great love and affection when you're in the military, and they must return that. Because if the military knows that he's backed by his families and by his people, he's encouraged to do much more. So these are some of the points I wanted to convey, which we learned as lessons from the 1965 war. Now, in regard to the ambition business, Yes, Harbaksh wrote this book. I mean, rather, Captain Amarinder Singh wrote this book about Harbaksh being the best leader, etc., etc. But as life would have it, uh, he never became the chief, and he retired as a disappointed man. But I think India did well by the selection of eventually Manekshaw, who became the chief during the 1971 war, which we'll cover shortly. Now I'll get back to the question of my joining 66 Armored Regiment.
Mm.
Now I came in as the second in command, and the commanding officer was a person called Lieutenant Colonel Narendra Singh at that time, who retired as a Major General later. He's from Hodson's Horse and a very well organized officer. And I must give it to him that he helped in the training of the new regiment extremely well and of the training of officers. But the problem with 66 Armored Regiment that we found was we were being raised in Ahmednagar, that is the home of the Armored Corps. There were two regiments being raised, 65 Armored Regiment and 66 Armored Regiment, which were ordered to be raised because the infantry in India were crying out for more tanks, because in the plains of Punjab, the tanks become very important. Whereas General Chaudhary retired, he said the country does not have enough money to raise more tank regiments, and we were at a disadvantage vis-a-vis Pakistan. The moment Kamara Mangalam became the chief, he was a gunner officer, he said, we will raise two more regiments straight away. Now, in Ahmednagar, the Armored Corps, being not a very large corps, did not have enough manpower to raise two regiments. So they complained that we can raise one regiment with Armored Corps personnel drawn from various units. But we don't have enough manpower in the corps to raise 66 armored regiments. So at that time, as luck would have it, the guns that came to the artillery were slightly better with a longer range. So instead of having 8 guns in a battery of artillery, which is like a company of infantry, you have a battery of artillery, it had 8 guns. They decided to have 6 guns.
Oh.
Because the Indian field gun came and it was a better gun than the old 25 pounder. So they reduced their batteries from 8 gun to 6 gun. With the result, they had surplus manpower in each battery. Now they wanted to know how to deal with the surplus manpower. They were thinking of raising more artillery units, but for getting more guns and things which were to import, there was not enough money. So General Kamara Mangalam, who's the chief, he said to Ahmednagar that, all right, you can't provide the manpower for 66, so I'll provide from my gunner units who become surplus of manpower. So from about 20 regiments of Marathas and Ahirs, which were not classes which were in the Armored Corps of India up to this time. For the first time, Marathas and Ahirs were sent from the artillery to join this new tank regiment for its raising. Now, when a commanding officer had to send, say, 7 or 8 people or 10 people to a new raising, how did he select them? So the chief had told the commanding officers to select good people. He gave them good reports, but all the throwouts from the various batteries were sent to us, because commanding officer wants to get rid of chaps or people who are a bit paltry, or who are not very disciplined, or who are not very effective in their work. So we got a whole lot of bahus coming to us for training. So when we tested them and all that, we found that many of them lacked discipline, or many of them lacked. Artillery in the old days was organized as a regiment of artillery. The whole artillery is one regiment, and there are 60, 70 regiments calling themselves, Lieutenant Command calling themselves one regiment. In the infantry and the armored corps, because you're tussling with the enemy, you have a single regiment which is for keeps for the rest of your life. Unless you go up in rank beyond colonel, you are in that unit for the whole life. You don't move. When artillery, they keep changing their officers and JSOs here and there. So we have a regimental spirit in the infantry, and of course, the infantry has more battalions than one. They may have some infantry regiments have 18, 19 battalions. Now, they're one regiment with one setup which is creating the manpower. But in the Armored Corps, we had only one tank regiment as a regiment, you see. So we've got that regimental spirit, because inside a tank or inside the unit, everybody has to think like one man. As I described earlier, if you're a tank commander, you think of going there, automatically the tank driver starts going there, because the 3 or 4 man crew think like one person.
Right.
And if you have 3 tanks, you have to think like one person. One look at what the troop commander is doing, all tanks conform. Similarly with the squadron. So we have to have a very close-knit set of people in the Armored Corps. And we found that these utterly people, and the chief told us, if you don't like them, send them back and we get new ones. So we went through about 2,000 or 3,000 men, and eventually to select 600 of the best we could get. The officers were from Armored Corps, from various regiments. And we have another trade called the non-commissioned enrolled. That is, they're the cooks and the masalchis, and you work in your kitchens, your barber, your safai karamcharis and all that. These are known as NCE. So they have a separate system. So they were from the Armored Corps units. Officers were from Armored Corps units, but all the men were from the artillery. Anyway, it took us a little more time to get raised. Whereas 65 armored regiments got raised in 3 or 4 months, we took almost a year in Ahmednagar to get raised properly. Once we were ready to make us fit for battle, the commandant of the Armored Corps Central School, who is a Brigadier Karamchand from the Central India Horse, a very efficient officer, he really wanted to test us. So that before we went and joined a field formation in Punjab, he could assure the government and the Armored Corps Central, the Armored Corps, the Director of Armored Corps in Army Headquarters, it's a well-trained regiment. So we put them through a 3-day exercise. Now, in the 3-day exercise, Narendra and I were in the same team. He was the CO, I was the second in command.
Okay.
But I found that my experience, having been a staff captain in Armored Brigade in Babina under General Badwar and General K.C. Khanna, and the Brigadier Badwar at that time, and Brigadier K.C. Khanna and Brigadier Harprasad, that my deal was that though I am in the administrative staff, but whenever there's an exercise, I was called into the GS branch to control the battle. And I got used to controlling 3 tank regiments, moving them around by orders, because the brigadier was out front seeing what was going on. And there was a GSO 3, a man called Bandal Joshi, a very good friend of mine, and myself, used to run the whole thing, whether the brigade commander was there or not. We got used to that in exercises. So to find that in a unit, to command 3 tank squadrons was very easy for me. So I didn't wait for Narendra. The moment the exercise started, I took over the control and I was giving orders to everybody who moves where, and we were doing the thing. Now this carried on for 2 days. And then Brigadier Karamchand sent an order to us, get Major Sharma off the control, and we want to hear the voice of the commanding officer. So after that, Narendra had to command, but Narendra was not used to this, because he had commanded a squadron in Hudson's Horse very well, but to command 3 tank squadrons was a new one for him. So he and I were sitting side by side. I had to look at the map and say what we should do, and he should give the order. So I found I was very adept at handling 3 tank squadrons. No problem at all. And we did reasonably well. We had our first death here. What happened was that in Ahmednagar, there are not a lot of what are known as blind wells, not marked. So in the middle of the night, we were moving our tanks across, and one of our Sherman tanks went down into a well because his gun was in front. The tank didn't go down, the well got stuck because the gun was in front. And the rest of the tank went into the well. And the commander was a JCO, a young JCO. And he was sitting after that, and his head got bashed up, he got killed. So we managed to remove his body and send it to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Then after the exercise was over, commanding officer and his wife and myself and my wife Rupi and the squadron commander and his wife, we all went to meet the wife of this JCO who was also there. And she said something to us. She said, "You only came to meet me, when my man is dead, I'm part of this regiment. Why did you come and make friends with me earlier? This shows that your men and your JCOs or your officers have got families which are part of the military system. So it's not only the morale of the men that you have to look after, you have to also look after the morale of the women and the families and the children. Can't do that unless you get to know them. That means in peacetime, it is enjoined on all officers to go to their men, meet their wives, meet their children, find out if anything can be done. And I must tell you, in the British days, I give it to the British commanding officers in those days. They allowed 2 months leave to an officer, but he couldn't go back to England. He had to visit his recruiting areas. That means if his recruits came from Bengal or from South India or somewhere, that's where he had to go to spend his 2 months leave to meet the families of his troops. And if he wanted to go home to England, he had to take furlough, which is at half pay. You take another 2 months furlough and you go to England and spend time with your family there.
Right.
So
Right.
this system with the British commanders is very good, and we took time to learn it. But the lesson here is that whatever your unit is concerned, the officers must visit the JCOs and men's families with them and get to know their names and get to know their problems and get to know their schooling problems and the ration problems and the accommodation problems, the 101 problems.
Right.
He's not well or something. What is welfare? Welfare is medical and education. There are two things. A medical thing must be sorted out properly and good education must be available. There's two things that a mother looks for her children. See, that has to be done in peacetime. So we learned that lesson, and at least Srupi and I made sure that throughout our command we did that. So that's the way you muster the courage of your men and their loyalty. So now in the command of, I was the second in command, and we raised this regiment in Ahmednagar. A lot of interesting things happened there. I can't go into all those details. We don't have the time. But the fact is that we learned these lessons. And after this exercise was done, we were pronounced fit for war, as they say,
Okay.
and ready to be moved to operation formation. So 1967, early 67, or rather middle of 67, I would say, the 66th Armored Regiment was posted to Ambala and joined what is known as the 14 Independent Armored Brigade, which is in Ambala. Now the commander here was a person called Brigadier Randhawa. Now, I've spoken about him before because when I was in Ahmednagar as the captain and was training there as a gunnery officer and then became an instructor there, at that time, Major Randhawa was the Inspector General for Field Firing, the IG. He used to visit all the tank regiments when they were doing their field firing to see whether they were up to the mark or not and write a report which went to Army headquarters about that regiment's training and his firing capability. So he was known as instructor in gunnery, right? To visit all tank regiments. And whenever he could not go, because there's so many tank regiments at that time. At that time, there were about 12 tank regiments. But if he's gone to 2, 3 here and there was something available, he used to ask me to represent him to go to some tank regiment to check their capability of gunnery firing. So he and I became very close.